Yeah, super. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. There's still loads of you coming in, which is great, but we're going to kick off because there is a lot to cover. I think I know quite a few of you here, but for those of you that don't know me, I'm the CEO of CIBSE. Back in our June council meeting, we had a number of comments and discussions around the future of events, the future of how hybrid is going to carry on, whether physical events are going to rush back like a tsunami, whether we're going to stay digitally. And what we thought would be a really good idea was to bring in a couple of experts to talk through what the landscape looks like in the event world and give you some bits that you can steal and use in your own events. I also thought this was a really good opportunity to introduce you to Simon Parker. Morning, Simon. Simon is Managing Director of CIBSE Services and took over from Rowan a couple of months ago. Rowan retired recently. So Simon is going to chair this meeting going forward. This is an opportunity for us to learn from some really solid experts and to see how we want to take our own organisational events forward over the next coming years. So thank you, Simon, and hand over to you, and I hope you enjoy it, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ruth, and welcome everybody. This is my first outing as MD of CIBSE Service, so it's great to meet you all virtually, and as Ruth said, it's a shame we couldn't do it face to face, but I'm joined today by two fantastic guests, people that I've worked with for a long time now, actually. And in my previous life, events were my main job, and I also, for my sins, was the chair of the AEOs, of the Association of Exhibition Organisers, which Ed and Emma are both key participants. But clearly, what we thought today was to do a more sort of tips and tricks, really, as to these guys have actually been running events and have run events through what has been, I think, the most traumatic time for events that we all have known. And whilst it's been traumatic in the sense that, obviously we have not been able to do what we do, which is face-to-face events, what we have done is use it as a time to innovate and develop the platform. And obviously everybody will have heard of hybrid and virtual and omni-channel and all of these sorts of things. So I just thought we could demystify that and just think about practically what we can do as CIBSE in terms of how we develop our events, how we think about digital, how we think about virtual and hybrid. So just to give a little bit of background on Emma and Ed before I ask the first question. So Emma is the Managing Director of a business called Broadway Events. As I mentioned, she's a veteran of the exhibition industry, some 20 years. Obviously doesn't look it, but 20 years in the space. She started at some big organisations where I met Emma, but has since taken a more entrepreneurial route and does some amazing events in the care and education sector, small and large, so from small conferences of 150 delegates through to big, sort of 4,000 attendee events. But is a really innovative and practical practitioner, if you like. So that's Emma. And then moving on to Ed. So Ed is, as you'll see from his background, the MD of 73 Media. He also took the corporate route to start with. There's a bit of a theme here. And three years ago set up his own business. And he does some amazing shows as well. Things like the rugby show. So obviously you'll be talking about that, I'm sure. The One Earth show. He's also doing something, he knows our space as well. So he's doing Manufacturing and Engineering Week, which is in June 22. And just 3 events that he's launched, it just said, without seeing the venues in the US. He's also an AEO member and a lecturer in event management. So we look forward to hearing his wisdom and words. As is often the case with these meetings, if you could put any questions that you have in the sidebar, so in the chat function, and hopefully by the end of it we'll have some time to ask for some live questions as well. So if there's questions that you then have at the end, we'll keep that to the end. But we're going to keep it pretty formal, as I mentioned, and also, sorry, informal, not formal. Keep it very informal. but we'll try and get some practical tips, because I know that the variety of events that you do are wide and varied. So we just need to make sure that we've got some good practical tips that you can go away from this meeting with to make your event, as I mentioned at the beginning, unmissable. So I'll start firstly, my starter for 10 for you both is clearly, as I mentioned, you know, the event industry has been through this massive disruption, should we call it? It's probably euphemistically called a disruption. How has it been for you, Emma? How's the last 18 months?
Yeah, it's all, it seems like a bad dream, to be honest with you. March 2020 seems like a lifetime ago for us. It's been very traumatic and very emotional, but we're still here, which is the main thing. We had to move 10 events 4 times over the last 18 months because obviously the start dates kept moving when we could have people face to face again. Moving events is actually more time consuming than running events. We had to adapt and learn new ways of doing things, which was interesting, but also pretty scary when your business is face to face. And we created online conferences for the sectors we work in, which are education and healthcare, which were really well received by our sectors. We've been running live events now since June and have run 5 so far, with another one taking place. But just hoping that things will sort of start getting back to more normality for 2022.
And before I go to Ed, so that's a really interesting and crucial point, and I'm sure that a lot of people are considering, which is the time right now to start thinking about a return to face-to-face? Is there an appetite, is it like a pent-up appetite, you think, from people to reconvene and get into a room and obviously meet?
I think it all depends on your sector. I really do. I think it all depends on your sector. We've been running our healthcare events since June, but they're smaller than our education one. And what I was saying was our education one, yeah, it went really well because people wanted to be in the room, but the numbers were down on what they were the previous years. So, but I think that's because they obviously work with children and it was a lot harder for them to come out in the case of the rising in schools and nurseries and things like that. And the same with our healthcare events as well. To be fair, our healthcare events are going really well. We did have one in July, which was a bit dire because it was in Liverpool and just before Step 4 opened, and that was a bit tougher. But yeah, I really honestly think it's all depending on events. And I think actually you've got hardier sectors, so which I would class it like as plumbing, engineering, mechanics, things like that, who I think are probably a bit more open to going back to face rather than sectors that are working with people in vulnerable situations. Okay.
Ed, so let's turn to you. Different portfolio of products, obviously, but same circumstances. So how has it been for you?
Oh, absolutely brilliant, Simon. So yeah, I was talking about it to a friend yesterday, and on March the 18th, 2020, I was in Miami doing a site visit. Then on March the 20th, I was in the airport desperately trying to get a plane back to the UK, so I wasn't trapped over in America. It was just the most surreal twist and turn of things. And we had to, same as Emma, we had to move, we had to cancel, we had to transition people and get them to agree to the benefit of moving things along, and it'll all get better. And then when it clearly became it wasn't going to be just a couple of months, and then it wasn't going to be just 3 or 4, and then it wasn't going to be 6. For us, we took a slightly different approach in terms of everybody had to, it was the dreaded word of 2020 was pivot, wasn't it? Which I think we all wish had been left to moving sofas in a Friends episode and never used again in any other context. But we all had to pivot, and our pivot was I transitioned the entire business into becoming an event agency to carry us through the lockdown period. So we ended up doing events for other people. There were lots of people that didn't know what to do. And I put about £30,000 into buying equipment, retraining the whole team on how to do virtual, because clearly we were going to have to do something. And if events weren't going to run for ages, and I'd never run a virtual event in my life, hadn't got a clue what they were about, And so we had to find out very, very quickly. And the first one we did with 4 weeks notice was the rugby show. So we transitioned the whole event and we ended up running 65 speakers, 95% live to camera for 3 solid days on multiple stages with 4,000 attendees, and it nearly killed me. And I can tell you, don't do that. That's the lesson I learned from doing it the first time. Do not do that. But it went really well, and that's what we moved into, and we did a lot of virtual events subsequent to that. We've even done one where we had 123 live stages simultaneously.
Wow. Well, we're going to get into that, and I think that just thinking about obviously the delegates on this call today, as I mentioned, the range of events are from small groupings of people through to a larger event, in a big venue. First question I guess I have for you is about the return to face-to-face. It's kind of what I was talking to Emma about. What have we learned, do you think, from this, and what should we be thinking about now that people are coming back into events? What have we learned, and what considerations should we now are at play, I guess, as a result of COVID? Emma, do you want to start?
Did you say Emma or Ed?
Yes, Emma.
Sorry. I think the one thing we've realised is you just can't take advantage of face-to-face again, really, after the last 18 months, can you? But I think it's been made clear that everyone loves relationships, and business is built on relationships. There's only so much you can do online, but actually, I think people are zoomed out, and I think people are, there is a place for digital, but I think it's made people realise that they want to be back face to face, and to, and just to be back together, really. It's so difficult, isn't it? It really is. Digital has come a long way, and it has been really good. But when we ran our event in September, the buzz and the atmosphere, and everyone was so excited and so happy to be talking to each other and just having those experiences, because life is all about experiences. And when you take experiences away, life gets pretty boring, doesn't it? And I think that's where events have really come into their own. And I think events are going to be bigger, and they're going to be better, and they're going to come back stronger. It might take a year or two, but I do think that's going to happen. Okay.
So, Ed, I guess, I've been reading as well, there was a flurry of events from September onwards, and articles saying the buzz is returning, etc., etc. And that's largely from the events press, so you would expect to hear that. But I guess there is, if I'm being more cynical, there is a little bit of scepticism about coming back because of fears, obviously, about infection rates and everything that goes along with that. How do we give people the confidence to return to face-to-face? Because I guess that's what these guys are going to have to be dealing with.
I think, I think coming back to Emma's point from before, it does vary from market to market, because you have different demographics in different markets and different age groups, and therefore different sensibilities and different levels of concern. I think actually we're running an event in 3.5 weeks' time, and very little of our pre-registration conversations have been based around, once we put out a very clear COVID policy, actually, do you know what, people have been fine. I was at, not quite feeling it, but I went to because I've had tickets for ages. I went to Brixton Academy and saw Kasabian last night with 5,000 people who were clearly much younger and much more energetic than I was. But the process of getting in was very, very simple. Everyone showed their vaccination status. So I think we don't want to get too caught up in discussing fear, because actually, the more we talk about it, the more it generates itself. I would say actually the lessons learned, and I said slightly going back to the question you asked Emma, I think the lessons learned are actually it's been horrendous for the events industry, but it's actually been a really brilliant wake-up call for the events industry, because in a lot of sectors and in a lot of cases, events have been, well, we've run it this way for the last 15 years, so obviously we're going to run it this way for the next 153. And there hasn't been, maybe because of busyness and speed and return and having to keep going through, looking at things differently, there hasn't been time to do that. Whereas actually there's been so much time to do that, to review how and what and why. I think there's been a change in view in terms of, and it depends again on the size and type of event. I think exhibitions, absolutely, where you have stands and you're expecting to do business, physical smashes every other format without question, because most people, when they engage and do business on a trade show floor, it's they were walking to a conference session, see something out of the corner of their eye that they weren't actually looking for, end up chatting to the person, and suddenly they're your biggest customer. And that serendipity moment, as it's often referred to, only really happens from walking across a floor and seeing something and having a conversation you weren't planning. And we've all seen for virtual formats where people have tried to do exhibitions online, and nobody needs to go to the nobody needs to go to the stands, because they can go straight to the content because it's a click of a button. You have to actively go and search through, and no one does. That being said, when you look at the engagement, the content, the way that you can run different things, I think technology has changed, and I think there are now 813 different virtual event platforms, and
Wow.
and I wouldn't count something like Zoom or Teams or Hangouts as being an event platform. This is great for this kind of context where it's meetings and groups of members coming together. But the things you can do now virtually is insane. And if you are doing 100% content and learning led programs where that is the focus of people coming along, actually the opportunities and strengths you have now for that as a format, because before, say, for example, you wanted to bring together, say, if you go back to my example of the rugby show, I had a panel at the rugby show virtually talking about the Lions. So if anyone likes rugby, the Lions talk. So I had Martin Bayfield hosting it, and my three guests were Martin Johnson, Sam Warburton and Brian O'Driscoll. And as it was described in the press afterwards, it was considered the Avengers Assemble of rugby. If I'd ever tried to get them to turn up physically to an event to speak, it would never have happened, and it would cost me a fortune. But because they only had to give an hour of their time, it didn't matter where in the world they were, and we were able to bring together a content program that would physically be impossible to do. And it's all in HD, and it all comes together so you can record it, you can pass it out afterwards. Those kinds of things are a huge opportunity. And I think particularly when we're talking about global events, because there's still such a huge challenge in terms of crossing borders, I think virtual offers a huge opportunity there. So I think there's lots to it, really.
Yeah, and I guess what it does is extends our universe. It extends the potential of people that can come to our events, and people traditionally that can't. And as you say, internationally, it obviously helps us because people don't have to travel. So Emma, then this I guess a lot of the delegates today will be toying with the idea of, you know, whether they go virtual or whether they go face to face. Is there a hardened? I mean, what suits which format? I mean, what sort of set of circumstances in your view? I mean, Ed's just talked about, you know, content and getting those other speakers. Are there rules of thumb?
No, I don't think so. I think it really does depend on the type of event that you're running. So if you're running a smaller meeting, yes, that works very well online. But actually, I know, Simon, you were telling me some of these events range from like pub quizzes to awards and things like that. You know, small meetings, yes, they work online, but people like to network. So I think the more face-to-face opportunities we can give them, the better. I think with face-to-face as well, you can take out a lot of the risk when you're doing live events. So you can, yes, you can do the whole COVID vaccinations and things like that. But what we've done is just simple things for our smaller events, which might be what some of your members are running. So we did we got someone to sponsor a load of PPE, so that we had wipes and face masks and a load of hand sanitizers everywhere. And we did a thing with wristbands as well, so that everyone knew, all exhibitors and visitors knew what each other person felt comfortable with. So green was high fives and hugs, amber was fist bumps, and then red was, 6 feet away, basically. But it's just putting little things like that in place gives people the confidence to come back in and actually know how each other person's feeling. But I do think there is a place for online in the future, but I don't ever think it will overtake face-to-face. I really do think that now more than ever, people do realise that they want to be together, really.
And then in terms of Ed, in terms of the kind of face-to-face experience now, has that changed? Or I guess the essence of the question is, what, in your view, and knowing the events that you've done, makes a really great live event? Let's start with live and then we'll move on to virtual. So if there was a kind of a checklist of 5 or 6 things or however many, what would your little tips be for these guys?
I think, okay, so my tips for the best live experience is, and in my experience of running events and working for lots of organisations, and I've worked with a lot of associations and a lot of corporates, and we've done things for other people as well as ourselves. The challenges or the bits where people go slightly off the rails tend to be the same sorts of things. So one of those is when lots of people are really enthusiastic about an event and they've got lots of ideas and doing lots of different things. I'm sure everybody on this call is far too young to remember when the advent of PowerPoint came through. Certainly Emma wasn't even born then. But I remember the first presentations on PowerPoint when they came out. And what happened was that people discovered the world of transitions, and every single slide had about 47 animations and transitions on it, where every word came through as typewriter letters, complete with noise before it did this, before it did that. And it upset everyone. And my point is that in that situation, it was just because you can does not mean that you should. And there can be lots of ideas that can get thrown at events and that come through the process that become a distraction to what the main purpose of the event is about. So always go back when you try to change or think about what you're doing, always go back to, why are we doing this event? What is the main reason for doing it? And are we achieving that? And then also remember your audiences, because I've worked with people in the past where their entire focus has been on the attendee audience. And I worked with an association where we were putting blocks of content. It was an exhibition, an association trade show, but what they'd done was they'd put blocks of content that were 3 or 4 hours long, where every single delegate was in it, and so nobody was on the trade show floor, yet your exhibitors and sponsors were the people that had paid for the whole thing, funded the association. It was 98% of their turnover that kept the association doing the good work, but they were so focused on their members they forgot they had another audience over here they had to keep happy, who actually were the ones that enabled them to do all this stuff for the members. So it's just remembering those audiences. And also, final one would be leave them wanting more. If you've got 15 great things you can do for your events, do 3 or 4 of them, because once you've done 3 or 4 really cool things, people get a bit saturated on really cool things, and you don't get the extra benefit of, wow, they've done 10. You get loads and loads of buzz and positivity of your 3 or 4, and then you've got your things lined up for the 3 or 4 new things you're going to do in year 2 and in year 3 and in year 4. So don't give away the store right from the get-go. Hold stuff back so that when you're on site talking to people and getting everyone excited and being back together, you can talk about, well, wait for next year. This one's going to be brilliant, but let me tell you about next year. It's going to be awesome.
Okay.
Can I jump in, Simon?
Yeah, go.
So successful live events, we work on 4 key pillars to make our events successful. So content, you need industry speakers talking about current topics and issues going on in the sector. This is what attracts people. Yes, exhibitors do, and people want to see people, but content really brings them in. Networking, you need to think about the networking points throughout your event and create extra opportunities for people to network as well. Experience. So think about what visitors are coming to the event for and how to make it an experience that they walk away talking about how great it was and excited about the next event. And then the 4th one we work on is entertainment. So you always need a little bit of a wow factor at events that are really going to catch people's eye. And that will all depend on the type of event you're running. But before the event, you also really need to get people excited about coming, which then creates a buzz about being on site.
Okay. So, and I'm just thinking about, again, these guys have got choice in terms of venue. how important is venue and venue selection, and are there tips with regard to venue management that these guys can think about as well?
Think about who's coming and what the event's for, and then you'd need to think about what sort of AV would you need if it's for a conference, or if it's for awards, or if it's for an exhibition. Think about catering facilities, car parking. So, for example, our Care Roadshows, they're small pop-up one-day events, and each of those venues that we generally use race courses or football grounds, because they've all got free parking, easy access, big rooms, good catering, that sort of thing. So really think about what your end goal is and who you're trying to attract to that venue, so that you can sort of match it up. We used to use venues in city centres for those Care Roadshows, and they didn't work anywhere near as well, because everyone would have to drive and pay 20 quid for parking, and actually that didn't attract people at all. They wanted just to be able to turn up, have free parking, go away again. So really think about your audience when thinking about the venues that you're going to use. That's great advice.
Anything that you'd like to add to that?
Well, it's venue selection. It starts at geography, doesn't it? So it's where is your audience going to come from? Because you can pick a fabulous venue, but if it's too far away from where your core audience potential is, you're still going to see limited numbers. So the geography kind of directs the part of the world, country, continent that you're going to be in. And then, as Emma said, it is then thinking about what type of event is it, what kind of audience type is it, and how many people you think you're going to get, and what you need from the actual structure of the event in terms of catering. A big one is also, you can find, particularly with smaller events, if you find a lovely hotel somewhere that's in the countryside, you then discover that their internet and their Wi-Fi and their mobile phone signal is the worst thing in the history of the world. And that is a crucial one, because if you want people to be away, particularly if it's business related, if you're getting business leaders together, being completely remote and not having access or connectivity to the business or to what's going on back at the home store is actually a huge thing. So I think free car parking is a big one. Good connectivity so that you can stay in touch, because it will prolong the length of time they're able to be with you if they're still able to communicate and run their business from wherever they are, is absolutely crucial. And catering AV, a big one is hidden costs. So you can get quotes from venues. So that's a really important thing to follow up on, actually, depending on where you are. But particularly overseas in America, it can be really, really bad. But if you take the UK as an example, when you go through, some venues require particular types of dressing in terms of either carpeting or what you can and can't do in terms of branding. Some of them have in-house companies that you have to use. Some of them, if you've got your own AV company, do like a corkage charge for bringing your own suppliers in. So all of those kinds of things you need to ask the questions of, because it's very rare that the initial quote that you get is actually your price. So you could end up getting quotes from 3 venues where one of them's £5 grand cheaper, but actually when you dig deeper and you've signed the deal, you're like £15,000 more. The other thing to do is do all of your negotiating, dig through to find out everything you want to get for free, ask for extras, and do it all before signing any contract. Because quite often venues will say, right, well, let's sign the main thing and we can talk about the peripheral bits afterwards. But your best leverage is obviously before you've signed the agreement. So if you want free coffees, or I want an additional coffee break and I don't want to have to pay for it, or all those different things, ask for the earth. And they won't give it to you, but they will give you, maybe a couple of continents, and then you can get your signed tenancy at that point.
Brilliant. So then, if we move to the virtual space, to the online events, and the hybrid ideas that we talked about earlier on. Again, I guess these guys would be interested to know in terms of what makes a good one, and I guess quite a lot of the stuff that same applies to the physical event. But also, I mean, Ed mentioned that there are, I think you said 800 odd platforms now. The question is, I mean, do we need to spend a fortune on technology, or I mean, this is obviously being done on Teams. So is this adequate, or do we need to be thinking a little bit more jazzy? I'll start with Emma.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, technology, there is so much out there, and actually a lot of organisers over the past 18 months use exhibition platforms because they wanted to create their exhibitions online. I never did that because I didn't believe that there was the right platform for exhibitions. I don't think people get enough engagement from them. Ed might have a different experience to me, but I just don't think online exhibitions work. But we created our conferences on a very simple platform called Hey Summit, and that has that's really easy to stream live, add pre-records, have Q&A chats, create Zoom breakout rooms, and it's all really simple. We didn't know anything about doing virtual events last year, and it was, sorry, someone is lifting a roller shutter door behind me, so it's really loud. I'm sure sorry about that.
And people doing that.
Hello, and yeah, so it's all about finding the right platform for what you want. Zoom and Teams is pretty good for most small things. We've used Zoom webinars quite a few times, and then we use a separate conference platform for our pre-records and our Q&A chats and our networking and things like that. But again, the platform does all depend on what type of event you run. But to run a successful online event, it really is the same. So we use the same 4 pillars as we use for our live events. We created some brilliant content last year. I know Ed was saying the same thing with his rugby show. We got some brilliant speakers who actually probably wouldn't ever come and speak to our live events because they're either international, they don't want to travel, or it would cost us a fortune to get them involved. And that's the main thing, is that a lot of times you want these speakers at your event, but you can just never afford to get them there. So that's really good. People are just more open to doing virtual, and actually if you can create relationships with those great speakers that you want to get involved online, then you might be able to get them involved in a later live event once they've started working for you. The networking is a little bit harder online, I think, which is why our platform does the sort of chat function and then the breakout rooms, so that we can list people and they connect with people on who they want to see, whether it's on topics or whether they're with friends and things like that. But the networking is never going to be as easy as face-to-face, really.
Okay. Ed, Sophie's saying that, you know, for online particularly, we should be looking at ways to get more sort of audience participation, if you like. So things like the polls and Slido and et cetera, et cetera. Is that your experience? And I guess the same question to you, which is, in your view, I know you've done a lot of virtuals. What have been the good ones, and what are the tips that these guys can take from those? So
I think it's, I mean, you know, once again, agreeing with Emma, it is, you've got to, I liken it to, you've got to think of it like choosing a venue. There are so many different platforms, and you choose a venue for a specific reason. And the platforms all have different strengths and different abilities, and some of them now can cost you upwards of 50,000 per event.
50,000?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think those sorts of budgets, so you might want to lower your...
Well, exactly. But the point, so those kinds of events are, it's incredible what you can do, the engagement that you can have. But I think a big point, and I will come on to Sophie's question, but a big point is, remember it is I mean, stating the obvious here, but remember it is a different medium. So where events have gone really badly wrong, run as virtual events, was a lot of people right at the start just lifted the physical event and dropped it into a virtual platform. So you had an exhibition, you had a conference program, you had workshops, and that was it. We just taken the platform, we just chucked our exhibition into that. Well, the exhibitions and live events have been designed to be live events with physical engagement and speaking to people and an exhibition floor that you work around. And I agree with Emma, of all of the platforms that I've used, which isn't 813, but I've certainly used a good 30 or 40, the exhibition thing does not work. You can do booths and you can provide all these different things, but all you end up with is very disgruntled people expecting it to be the same, and it won't be. However, and it is a big however, Teams, as I said before, Teams and Zoom's great for this kind of format, absolutely brilliant. You're just sharing a piece of content and information, everyone's in, they can type in their questions and leave. However, you can do so much more without having to spend the earth now. And a lot of these platforms, you actually create the content, which is what we do for people, and we stream it into the platform. And I liken it to much more being like, this is more broadcast, if anything, than it is events. So everything's in HD. You test your speakers in advance. You have a mixture of live and pre-recorded content. You bring your pre-recorded speakers in to be live for the Q&A. You have a lot of interactivity. You segment it so that it doesn't, because you've got to bear in mind, no one's going to sit at a computer screen for 8 hours. They're just not, unless it's my teenage son doing Minecraft. There is literally no one that sits for 8 hours doing things. So you have to put in what I call palate cleanser content, which is periods of things that break up and refresh and engage you so that you can do different elements. So we did an awards do. If you think about an awards really, if we're totally honest, and you know, we've all been at the AEOs and the EN awards, if you're totally honest, the purpose of an awards is you rock up, you see all your peers and mates from the industry, you get all glammed up and have a really nice time with your team and with whoever else. You listen out for the category that you're in and sort of try and keep the noise down to a minimum whilst you're chatting through the rest of them. Then if you win, you get really loud. If you lose, you get even louder because you think, well, let's just get drunk instead. And then everyone dances afterwards. And that is 90%, if we're honest, of what an awards is about. If you try and do them virtually, that 90% is removed and all you've got is lists. Yeah. And trying to do that in a virtual setting. But what we ended up creating was we ended up with an awards do that we ran, which had 3,000 attendees at it. It was a 3-hour program because the association in question had 36 categories.
Wow.
And we managed to get a retention rate of that 3,000 people of 94% stayed for the entire thing. And we did various live breakout rooms and entertainment rooms and a gin room. And we had a live and unplugged. We had a guy that was in The Voice who was in his bedroom taking requests from everybody in the channel that was on there, and he would do a sing along. We had a disco, which I wasn't convinced would work. And we ended up having to switch it off 30 minutes after the close day with 300 people still in it. And we did lots of creative content and surprise content and wow things that we didn't tell people about, all of which we did. So we had David Hasselhoff did a video message, Charlie Sheen did a video message, Carol Baskin from The Lion King did, or whatever, Tiger King. I've never even watched it, but she was key at the time. But we had all these different things that sort of surprised. And it was coming back to Sophie's point finally, it is that creativity, it is that engagement, it is that interaction, it is asking them things. And then also putting in surprises, because once you've got a surprise that you think, wow, that was amazing, it makes you kind of pep up to go through, but also there's a fear of missing out on what else is going to come up that I'm not going to see if I leave early. But those sorts of things, I've worked on events for people now where they're turning in 6-figure profits on virtual events. And
I think the key is it's not a replication of what we do.
Certainly not me, but they are.
No, or us. But it's not a replication of the physical event, is what you're saying, and also be creative and experiment, you know. And
also think of, when we think about a physical event, the physical event finishes, and we might record things online. Normally, in my experience, 99% of the time when I've recorded at a physical event, all I've ended up using it for is a 3-minute, you make sure you're here next year video, and then the rest of it sits on a server somewhere and I've done very little with it, because recording it to a high quality format when it's physical takes a lot of cost, which we don't normally factor in and want to do, and the production afterwards. When you do things in a virtual platform, it's all HD, you can dictate in the start. You can also, when you've got speakers in and you're recording them, say you're pre-recording someone, if you've got loads of really cool content that they could talk about, they're going to be there anyway. Ask them a load of other questions, record that at the same time, segment it out, which doesn't take much cost or time to do, and see it as a content delivery. And remember that a virtual event is not just when you're there. You can use it to your email databases, you can use it as ways of showcasing different vertical topics, and you can make it last for a lot longer.
So lots of incredibly rich and practical comment there from both of you, thank you. And we're coming almost to the end of our time before we open to questions, and hopefully there will be a couple, but what, I guess, again, I would think a lot of the delegates, what concerns them is obviously people turning up and making sure that, you know, that they market their events effectively to the right people, and that, you know, people turn up in number. And also when people say they're going to turn up, then they do turn up. So do you have any tips on that in terms of, you know, what creates that buzz and what also makes people attend those events? And how best to market, I suppose?
For us, we've got lots of different elements to our marketing, but I know a lot of you won't have the same access to data that we do. Social media is a great free way to interact with others in the sector and create a buzz. LinkedIn works very well for us in our healthcare sector, but then Facebook works better for our education sector events. So again, it's finding out what social media platform works best for you. And you can always use a social media scheduling tool. Actually, there is one called Social Pilot that lets you have a free account for up to a certain amount of brands. So that'd be quite good for your regional events. We also write content which we share with our partners to share across their channels, so that we get people that we might not have reached for our marketing. So we do that a lot. So really, it's trying to talk to people who've got a similar goal to you, is in the same market, but that can get you access to more people, basically. WhatsApp's a good one. Myself and Ed are part of a media WhatsApp group, and it started with, I don't know, not many of us, but now it's got over 300 people involved. That's great for sharing ideas and talking about meeting at events. That would actually probably work quite well in your sector. So there's probably already WhatsApp groups on a regional basis or maybe on a national basis that your members are already using. So that would be quite a good one to utilise. A lot of people use that for events, don't they, Ed? Yeah, and then writing content about what's going to be at the event. So getting that excitement before the event as well. So whether that's a special guest, a high profile speaker, or even if it's just a topic. So like, I don't know, so for instance, in the earlier sector at the moment, they give a certain amount of funding per child, but then they don't cover that funding. The government then don't cover that funding to match it up. So then a lot of nurseries are going out of business. So that's quite high profile for us. So that always attracts people. So it's thinking about topics that are really current and maybe damaging in a way, because people obviously need, you know, if other people are having issues, other people like to hear about how they solve those issues. So writing content about how to get people there. Word of mouth, though, word of mouth is the best form of marketing that you could get. So what I would suggest is maybe pick someone for each event who could champion that event, who can share with their network, and then other people can share their network and so forth. But yeah, definitely word of mouth is the best way.
Right. Great, practical, and in the main free tips, actually, aren't they? Nothing costs in that. So we like
I took Rasheen's advice on board earlier this week.
It does. Ed, obviously you want to spend 50 grand.
Whoa, back up the truck, fella. I don't want to spend 50 grand at any point. So I'm just saying what some of the platforms, as I said, I've not used that one.
I'm joking.
But no, I think have a communication plan. So think through your audience journey. So when we put together a marketing plan for an event, I think about my audience, and then we think about the length of time we've got in between each. So for example, if you're doing a conference, normally I would give it about 12 weeks of actual solid marketing. So if we're starting 12 weeks out, think about, firstly, I want to be engaged by what we're doing, by the event. So show me the first thing that I'm going to receive and see. It might be an email, might be direct mail, it might be postcard. Some postcard is not nearly as expensive as it used to be because it's quite light, and you can print it and you can make something quite eye-catching. And because very few people use direct mail anymore, it's the sort of thing that if you've got their postal address, it lands on a desk and has quite a wow factor to it. Yeah. So think about how I'm going to keep my audience engaged, and what is it that they're really interested in. The second thing is there is often a danger, a bit like, I don't know why I'm on a 1980s tip at the moment, but like Buckaroo, if anyone remembers that game, I used to love that. And you try and load something with so many different bits and pieces that actually it just flies in the air and nothing works. So think about your call to action, and your call to action for each thing should be one thing, not 5 different things. So, you know, you've got these speakers and you can go and meet them over here, but we want you to register for this, but also you can go and meet these people. And so make sure you sign up for that. And it becomes kind of overwhelming on the senses. So that's why you have your 12-week plan. So all 5 of those call to actions you might have had, brilliant, absolutely different hooks to pull in your audience, but don't try them, do them in one go. Factor them into your timing of when you're going to schedule your program of sending things out. I would also say, so social media is great. Some things do cost you money in social media. Obviously, if you do a campaign in Facebook or LinkedIn, Facebook can be quite expensive, depending on your audience. But there's also a good piece of software called Hootsuite, which is another one that you can get for free, providing you're under a certain number. And that allows you to effectively program in social media posts into multiple social media channels, and you can do them all simultaneously. So you can put in a program of social media, you could put together 50 posts, put them all in, and it will automatically send them all out and monitor them. So you don't have to constantly be, oh no, I was supposed to do an Instagram, oh, I was supposed to do a Twitter, a tweet. All of those things can then be programmed in, and as I say, it doesn't really cost you anything. And then the other thing to do is, when you get speakers, so speakers and sponsors all have they tend to be data rich. So if you take LinkedIn as an example, so if I was doing an event for the events industry and I went, wow, I've managed to get Simon Parker to come and talk, I would then go to you and say, really delighted that you're here. We've created this tile for you to post on LinkedIn saying that you're speaking. You then say, really excited to be at this content, and of your thousands of connections on LinkedIn, about 80% of them are going to be my target audience if I'm targeting at events. So and it's not coming from me, it's coming from you. So your colleagues are going, oh yeah, I'd love to come and hear Simon speak. So that is a really great way of doing it. So make sure you're keep it as simple as possible, because if you want to tap into these people, you want to give them everything. The likelihood is that Simon or your relevant speakers will want to support you, but not if you say to them, here's can you write us a post, or can you do this, that and the other, because they'll be busy and they won't get around to it. Whereas if you provide them with a tile and a selection of words that they can just cut and paste in, 99 times they will do it.
Well, I mean, they don't want to speak to an empty room, do they? So they presumably want to try and get it out there to as many people as possible. And you're absolutely right. You know, by the fact that they're speaking, you would think that they're pretty well connected and therefore have some pretty good contact. So I think we miss out on that quite a lot with conferences. So that's great from both of you. That's superb. I am going to bring that to a conclusion. I thoroughly enjoyed it, loved it. I genuinely hope that our audience did. I'm sure they did, because we've got some good numbers and they're still here. So thank you so much for bearing with us. And I hope it was also that kind of mix of the broader sort of event space, but also more practical tips and tricks, as I mentioned. And I think, you know, I could certainly jot down 5 or 6 really interesting points that, you know, we can use at CIBSE here, at CIBSE Central in Balham. So I hope that that is true of everybody else in the groups, regions and societies. So I will open for questions. If you do have any questions, please put your camera on and you'll be ready to go. And give it a couple of seconds.
Can I just pick up on Philip's point? Philip's put about we found attendance at online CPD events is higher than when we would run from face-to-face events. I think if the attendance is higher, I think you should, if it's something like that, I think you should carry on doing virtually. Just because we can do live doesn't mean you have to. I think, you know, if it's less cost, so, you know, still run them.
Philip, hello.
Well, what we're thinking of doing is actually doing a hybrid, because we found them so successful, but we'd missed the networking aspect, and we're trying to get that back in there. So by doing a hybrid of actually attendance on and on online, so video in the presentation effectively is what we're considering.
Yeah.
So,
if you want to do a hybrid event, I think it's better to use a venue that's already set up for this, because they have the equipment, the expertise and experience of running previous hybrid events. There's a lot more choice of venues now that are running hybrid events than there were 2 years ago. A lot of venues invested in this over the last 18 months. One of the questions, if you're wanting to run hybrid events at venues, is ask them how many they've run in the past, and if they can give you some examples so that you can look them up online so that you can see the quality. Because if other people are running hybrid events, that content is going to be somewhere that you would be able to find them. So I would ask those. If you don't use a venue that isn't set up for hybrid, then you'd need to think about a lot more. So you'd need to think about the equipment you'd need, the technical support to stream the event, and lots of other things. And I think that would just add a lot more cost on. So we were thinking about doing the same thing for our exhibition in September. But when we budgeted, when we looked at all the costs compared to the budget, it was just too extreme for us, because actually our seminars were on the exhibition floor, and for us to record and stream all of that, it wouldn't actually have been that good quality, because you would have had all the background noise of the exhibition. So think about where you're streaming it as well. So we actually decided to do a essentially like an omni-channel event for that. So we did it live in September, and then we're getting all the speakers again to pre-record it and putting it on our digital platform in November, just so we knew that the sessions would be higher quality. But you have two options. You could do it that way, or you could go ultimately for a hybrid venue.
Thank you, Philip.
Well, have you got something to say?
Yeah, I would just to add into that. I think there's a degree of definitions of what hybrid actually means, because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So when you're talking to people about hybrids, in its truest sense, hybrid is actually effectively amalgamating two different audiences together, but providing them with exclusive content for both individual formats, and then having crossover to allow them to network with each other. And actually, it's quite a convoluted process. So it depends on whether you mean hybrid is you can physically be there, or you can watch a stream of it. And if that's what you mean, it's effectively using two channels, but it's not truly a hybrid event. So when you're having conversations with suppliers or venues, what you don't want to get is kind of pulled into something which ends up being much more convoluted and thereby much more expensive, simply because of a definition. So it's about having, so I wouldn't worry about using the hybrid word. I would make sure that any brief you give to a venue is, we are trying to do this, and this is what we mean by it physically, and we are trying to do this for our online audience, and this is what we mean by that, so that you don't kind of, they are talking at tangents to you, because it's one of these Wild West words, I think, is hybrid, that lots of people are using it, and lots of people, it means different things to lots of different people. So you just need to make sure you're as clear as possible. You still use it by all means, but make sure that your brief to any venue that you give makes them completely sure of what good looks like to you.
Yeah, okay. The thing along the lines of actually having it where the almost videoing the presenter is doing it, to keep it in its simplest form. That's what we think of. I think going to be lack then is actually the feedback to the audience, unless you've got a big screen there. Get back to Emma's point that you probably need a specialist venue to do that, to have that.
Yes. You can stream directly from. It just makes a slight amendment to your filming on site, but you can stream directly into a virtual platform from your camera, which effectively gives you a live feed. You can also delay it if you want to do things whereby you wanted to segment it so it's slightly different for the physical versus the virtual. There's lots of simple things you can do to make it a better experience for the virtual audience, because if it's going really well, which is really good, and I'm hearing that a lot from people where it's things like CPD, because you're there to get your professional points. There are some times when you're there where the main reason you're there is to meet other people and network. And there are other times where actually the fact you don't have to travel anywhere, you don't have to get a hotel maybe, or do this, that and the other, or take a day out of the office, but can learn it, get your points and be done. that's a much better format for them. So I think what you don't want is one audience to feel like second-class citizens because they couldn't physically be there. That's the challenge of doing it well.
Yeah, you mentioned venues before. There's one last one there. Is there any directory we could use to find, or any way of searching them? Because everybody's going to. Is there any simple way of searching them?
So there's there's another association, because obviously there's lots of them, which is the Association of Independent Event Agencies. I want to say that's how it is. I think it's the AIEA. And the majority of those companies are quite small, but they're venue finders. So effectively, you go to them, it doesn't cost you anything at all. They'll get a commission from the venue, but you can give them a brief, say the region and everything else, and they will charge out and find your venues for you, so you don't have to actually do it.
That's really useful.
Yes, thank you
very much. Appreciate those comments and that interaction is brilliant. There's a couple of questions coming through on the chat about our role, so CIBSE's role in terms of helping the regions. And as I mentioned at the beginning, my background's from events, so what I'm hoping to do, and I'm talking to the SFE and SLL already about some events that we can do and help. So one of the things that I want to do is build that muscle, if you like, at HQ and build a team. So I'm recruiting at the moment for an event manager. So we obviously can't do every event, but certainly we would like to do more, and we would like to support, because we feel that this is the lifeblood of what we do as an organisation, and those meetings are essential to that, and we want to help as much as we can. So obviously, if there is anything that you want me to help you with, give us a shout and we can talk that through. And there are also freelance event organisers that can do it, aren't there, Ed?
well, as it happens, yes, there are, and we work with a whole host of different people. So feel free to get in touch.
Exactly. So I think we're pretty much coming up to our hours. So absolutely fantastic, Ed and Emma. Thank you so much, and you hit the brief on the head, so absolutely brilliant in terms of the tips and some of the great experiences that you retold today, which I'm sure will help us all in the future. And thank you everybody that's attended today. It's in great numbers. I'm really chuffed that you've attended. I hope obviously that you've taken something from it. Let us know what you think. Any comments how we can improve and get better obviously will be well received. But thank you, everybody, and goodbye. Have a good Thursday. Remain well.
Thanks very much.
Bye. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Emma.